Thank you so much for joining us, sir. We read a statement from you detailing how the financial impact that load shedding has, especially on small businesses, and you raised a figure of 2 billion rand. How do we get to that figure?
Well, look, load shedding affects the productive economy, and the estimates hover around 2 billion rands. And I think with the interview that you've just had with Mr. Etzinger, the system still remains vulnerable, which means the threat of load shedding still will sustain over the next week or so. So I think it's important for us to look at the impact that it has over the whole economy, and on the one hand also on the small and medium enterprises, where the implications can be quite critical.
Now, speaking of those implications, I mean, which sectors would you say are hardest hit by load shedding?
Well, based on our experience, having dealt or dealing with many SMEs, the SMEs that are involved in manufacturing tend to be highly impacted, those in retail, and those in the hospitality industries. And then you find those businesses that are involved in storage or refrigeration, where there's an added risk in that whilst there's a potential loss of stock that can come from these interruptions, there's an added risk from the on and off switching that happens, where you'll have your equipment getting damaged, and it is often very costly to repair.
Now, how do we, it's a tough question, but how do we mitigate these losses? I mean, what ways can we go about trying to at least cover ourselves as small businesses?
Okay. You see, for us now, the important thing is that it's something that it's factors that are exogenous from our environment, the small and medium enterprises. So what we're trying to help our SMEs is to assess the extent to which they rely on electricity and try to tailor their operations around the load shedding schedule, should they be able to know upfront when these load shedding incidents would occur. And then should it so happen that they are not able to tailor around those load shedding's time, they should then try to get some backup power of some sort. It could be a generator, it could be the UPS, which would give them an uninterruptible source of power, at least during their hours of business. And then for those that are faced with like a computer-based hardware, which can be affected by this load shedding, they would have to try and get some kind of information backup on a cloud-based server, just to make sure that they don't lose the integrity and data that they are dealing with.
Now, we heard earlier from Mr. Etzinger that Eskom is vulnerable, so we can't say for certain when these load shedding will end. So is there an option for small businesses to get insured against load shedding? Is this something that's available, and is it something you would advise, if so?
Well, look, I mean, the list that I've mentioned of how these SMEs can try to mitigate against this is not exhaustive, and insurance is obviously one of the other options that they could consider to try and mitigate, particularly if you have damaged stock, if you have wastage and increased costs that come. You do have this business continuity insurance options that you can take to try and mitigate against this, but it would have been much better had this been predictable. As it is, with the system vulnerable and not knowing when these things are going to happen, for our SMEs who do not have the strength in the balance sheet to withstand this. Even Eskom, as you're speaking to Mr. Etzinger, says the equipment needs to be maintained. Imagine a small business who exhausts a lot of resources to get this equipment, and it breaks as a result of all these outages.
Speaking about exhausting the balance sheets, there are some small businesses who pay their employees on a rate per hour. So the losses in that instance would be even greater. So how do we manage that?
Exactly. On a productive hours that businesses have, remember, if these cuttages or outages happen over 2 to 4 hours, you have lost 50% of the day. And as you rightfully point out, those employees that are being paid by the hour would have lost half a day, and how did they replace it? It's gone. That day is not going to be replaced ever.
Okay, well, thank you so much for those tips and ways for us to work around the system. We appreciate your insights.